Commonwealth and with some of the other states, how do we stack up against international competition in the same categories in terms of vocational training and in terms of community?
Do you want to talk about vocational? I'll talk about the what you basically find is that, you know, there's been some controversy around the actual fraction of kids that get college degrees and level of educational attainment measures that are used cross-nationally. And the OECD put out this report that said the United States had fallen from the #1 with respect to graduation, the share of population in certain age groups that had college degrees. But a friend of mine, Art Hoffman down in DC, actually wrote this very thoughtful paper where he said, well, basically what you've done is you kind of misinterpreted these data. You don't really understand the data you're working with. And when you properly interpret this data, the United States is absolutely still on top. And I think Hoffman, I went through Hoffman's paper, and I won't get bored with the details, but he convinced me, anyway, whatever that's worth. That I think with respect to the secondary vocational technical system, you know, the other thing about this is there's been a lot of debate about, you know, science, engineering, the STEM occupations, you know, India and China getting into this business. And a few years back, I was working with this group down in DC called the Business Roundtable, and these Fortune 500 companies, and they do all this Fortune 500 company stuff. And they got into this pretty seriously, and they brought some people in, and they were talking about, you know, we were producing 68,000 engineers, and India was producing 600,000 engineers, you know. When you go through the data in India carefully, it's not at the bachelor's degree level engineers were producing. These are kids that are roughly equivalent to kids coming out of Charlie's program, maybe, you know, Ben Franklin kind of institute. It's not a similar, you know, kind of phenomenon. So I would argue that the United States higher education system is still the best, and that where we need to make some improvements is in the community college system. Not because I think the community college system does a powerful job, but I think its mission needs to change from one solely focused on access to one focused on retention. Then when you look at the vocational technical programs, you know, the U.S. vocational technical system I don't think is in very good shape because it doesn't follow the Massachusetts model. Massachusetts was, and Charlie could argue with me about this, Massachusetts was very unique to me. That the way other states, if you get out just south of Rhode Island has one really good regional vocational school. And then what it does is it creates these little centers that are kind of, the people that run them think they stink. And what they are is a local high schools will send the kid out for a day or two to that center to learn a trade. So there's no integration, no connection between the academic and occupational education. And you know, that might have worked 40 years, I don't think it did, but it might have worked 40 years ago, but that's just not a model that works today. That would be the predominant model in the United States. Yeah. So I think we might have a little trouble there. Yeah.
Want to add in?
Well, you know, I would add, you know, the real difference with the Massachusetts model and the rest of the country is when students come to a regional vocational technical high school or a community, a county agricultural school, they're there full-time. They take their academic subjects and they take their vocational subjects. We have football teams, we have cheerleading teams. It's a real high school experience. In many of the other states, they have these skills centers where there's really not that type of attachment. The second thing I think, and we've got statistics, I have it on my thumb drive, which is in my car, but all of the regional vocational technical schools have similar types of statistics. And I think one of the reasons is because a 14-year-old student selects what he or she is going to do for the next 3.5 years, and there's a passion where there's some sort of buy-in from that student for the particular program that they're selecting. And that's why I think one of the reasons you have extraordinary average daily attendance rates in these institutions, very high graduation rates, because that 14 or 15-year-old kid finally buys in and understands why he's in that school. In New Haven, Connecticut, John DeStefano, the mayor, is recreating his high schools, New Haven, around themes. A civics high school, a health technical high school, etc. He's seeing tremendous improvement in terms of student retention. So the model we use in Massachusetts has been pretty well for about 15% of the student population, because about 15% of high school kids in Massachusetts attend vocational technical schools, 85% attend chalkboard academic high schools. You know, Paul and I have talked a lot about this. When a student graduates from Shawshene, and we've tracked this, I know the percentage for the last 25 years, the percentage of students going to work. And I can tell you, and Paul can attest to this, those students going to work in a particular trade do very well. We do a 1-year follow-up and a 5-year follow-up. We're the only institutions in Massachusetts required to do that. We know what they're doing. Those students who go to 4-year colleges, about 30% of my students go to a 4-year college, they do very well. We did analysis, about 96% were still in their program 3 years later, which is phenomenal. Because maybe that health assistant student at Shawshene Tech is in a nursing program, or that electrical student might be an electrical engineering student at the University of Lowell, where we see abysmal performances at the community college level. And if I could keep them for another year, to maybe get them more academically proficient, or better focused, and have the ability to award associate's degrees, run a 6-year program. I mean, Michael Bloomberg mentioned this, I think 3 weeks ago, in New York, where IBM is lining up with the city of New York, and they're going to have a 6-year high school program from grades 9 through 14. And if students attain certain standards and certain attendance patterns and meet certain competencies, IBM has agreed to hire every one of those graduates at the end of that 6-year training. That might not be a bad model for us to look at as a state. For the most part, our institutions are shut down at 3:30 in the afternoon. We have multi-million dollars worth of equipment that can be much better utilized than they're currently being utilized. So, I think the Massachusetts vocational system, by the way, technical system, particularly regional system, is really the envy of a lot of vocational technical systems around the country. And these weren't created locally. Bedford Selectmen didn't meet with Bill Rick. Bedford Selectmen didn't speak to Bill Rick's Selectmen 40 years ago. But when the state put up 85% construction grants to build these institutions and promised 50% operational money and said we'll pay for the buses 100%, all of a sudden it created this synergy at the local level where people forgot about boundaries and started thinking about program delivery. We've got to get back to that. Many of these institutions were built 40 years ago. There's a lot of money that's going to be needed to re-energize them, and I just think that those things won't happen locally without some real state incentives at the state level.
Thanks, my name is Simon. I have 2 questions. First, I spent the last year working in workforce development and adult education, so I was glad to hear you guys speak. My question is, instead of pushing people into community colleges or this next step, what do you do? Because my clients, they wanted some sort of education, they wanted to continue going to school because they've been told that this is the way to make more money, but they really weren't ready for a 4-year school. But I encourage them to go to Bunker Hill and Roxbury and schools of this sort, because it's the next thing for them. So if those schools are failing, how do you direct people? And then the second, with the associate's degree or some sort of certificate from these 2-year schools, are they making a difference in pay? Do you actually see that someone that has an associate's degree or a certificate is making a substantial amount more?
Yes.
Or are we talking $1 or $2? Because I've noticed, again, with my clients, that some of them opted not to go because they realize that with the certificate you can get from Bunker Hill, you're going to make the similar money without work.
Let me answer the second part first. The returns to I mentioned this earlier. The returns to college are very heavily associated with access into jobs in the college labor market. And what you find is, I just ran this stuff, and what you find is that if you have an associate's degree and you get a job in the college labor market, the size of the earnings premium you get relative to high school grads is about 60%. It's extremely large. The problem is that we've got a pretty substantial fraction of associate's degree graduates who don't get that access. And the reason why they don't is they don't come out of occupational programs. So if you come out with a sort of a general degree, it's just much tougher, to get broken in. But if you come out with an ASN, business degree, any kind of occupational degrees, you just generally find, these kids do much better. And so I think that's the first part of the answer. Second thing is what do you do with your clients? And one of the great programs that's out there is something called Graduate Philadelphia. This was started a number of years ago. It actually deals with, I think, maybe who your people like your clients. And what it does is it takes adults and it helps them figure out how to go to community college. And these are third-party people that just kind of come in and they do a lot of that brokering function that the helicopter parent might do. You know, they kind of figure out what your course of instruction should be, given your goal. Okay, I mean, the problem is, the first thing to do is they help you figure out, what do you want out of this community college? This isn't a place to hang around. This is a place where I'm going to have a specific degree goal and generate an outcome that's going to lead me to a career. And so what they do is they focus these individuals on some specific kind of career outcome, and then figure out how to use the community college system to generate that outcome. The fact is that if you go to Bunker Hill Community College and you complete that nursing program, you can do really well. Okay, Bunker Hill has a bunch of wonderful programs over there where you can do really well. The question is, how do you broker through that mechanism of Bunker Hill Community College to finally get accepted into that nursing program? That's really the trick. Once you're in there, you got a pretty good shot. The problem is that for many of these youngsters and adults, it's that first part of the equation, getting stuck in a remedial system, getting stuck in non-credit bearing activities or credit bearing activities that are not related to occupational goals. That's where we have the problem. So solving those kind of problems for an organization like yours might make a little sense. Somebody's walking around with a microphone, so I can't. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
What I took away from the two presentations, one was a success story and one was a description of great struggles. And the success story was at the high school level, the vocational level, and the other was at the college level. And the question is, should one deduce a lesson from that both on effectiveness grounds and economic grounds, you know, if you can make an impact, you know, at the sort of 14 to 18-year-old, that's where the leverage is. But once you start trying to make an impact at the college level, it's going to be both much harder and less economic. Is that a correct conclusion, or is it not?
I would not buy that. I think that, you know, one of the reasons, one of the things I see the parts of the community college system do is they like to blame the secondary system. They have a test that they call AccuPlacer that's administered to virtually all community college students upon entry, because they have no other way of screening the kids. They don't know when there's no transcript, there's no letters of recommendation, there's nothing. The kid shows up in August or September.
Community service?
There's no community service. Well, there might be, but that's a different thing. But you got that. But I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Thank you, please.
But the AccuPlacer doesn't really predict anything. It doesn't predict the likelihood of retention. I mean, it's not a very good tool to figure anything out. Well, the problem is that 60 to 70% of the kids who go to a community college get screened in a remedial program. And then what we do is we turn around and we say, these high schools are no damn good because these kids were all failing the AccuPlacer. So I went through this data, and I found that a couple of years ago, this little report came out, and buried in the back of this report was data on who's failing the AccuPlacer. And what I found was 20% of the kids that scored advanced in the math MCAS score had failed the math component of AccuPlacer. So what's this tell you? What it tells you is some kids going into the community college or wherever they're taking this AccuPlacer on a Saturday morning, maybe he had a few toots the night before, and it's just taking this test because they don't know what it means. Or something like that. But the AccuPlacer just doesn't predict anything. But what it then enables some of the educational leaders to do is then turn around and say, well, see, the high schools aren't delivering. That's why we don't have a good graduation rate. But the paradox is, when we put kids out of these same institutions into four-year colleges, maybe they do a little bit better. And I'm not saying it's not a more complicated answer than that. I think it is. But at the end of the day, what I find is kids who go to two-year occupationally oriented schools, public or private, just do better than kids who don't go to those occupationally oriented kids. It's no accident that Springfield Technical Community College does a lot better, that the Vermont Technical College has tremendous outcomes, that the old Maine technical community college system generated great outcomes. One of the things you saw happen in Maine over the last 5 to 6 years is they moved from being a technical public two-year system to being a community college system. And when that happened, make a prediction, what happened to the graduation rates? Plunged.
One of the things that I do, I mean, and Paul helped me do this with my staff, is, I mean, we keep score. You know, at the vocational secondary level, we keep score. We keep score in a 1-year follow-up, a 5-year follow-up. I have a very frank conversation with my staff every year. If over the last 3 years, we didn't have a 65% of better placement rate, we're going to eliminate the program. It's amazing when I did eliminate a program. It's amazing how well teachers and practitioners got involved in calling employers that might not have hired a student for a couple of years, encouraging to hire a student. We know from, at least I know from 25 years of experience, 90% of my co-op students end up working for that employer full-time. So if they're given an opportunity their senior year to go out and be hired by a local electrician, and we had 15 out of 25 of my electrical seniors this year now working in co-op, there's a real high probability that student's going to get a job at the end of the rainbow. At the community college level, no one's measured that way. I mean, even at the high school level, no one's measured that way. I went to a private Catholic high school, and the big pride was whoever was going to college. Well, I can tell you, knowing a significant number of my friends, a significant number didn't graduate from college. And so I just think keeping score, whether it be academic proficiencies, whether it be job placement, whether it be college entry and college graduation rates are vitally important. Paul mentioned the AccuPlacer. We took a look at the AccuPlacer, and we require every student who tells us they're going to community college, we put them through a mini AccuPlacer prep test before they go and take that exam, because the AccuPlacers, I mean, some of the things they test in the AccuPlacer goes back to cosine, sines, and tangents, something that I haven't done since Mother DeFilippo taught me in the 7th grade. And unfortunately with that test, if you get 5 answers incorrect in a row, you automatically fail. And so then the student has to go, who might be an advanced or a advanced student in an MCAS exam, that student's going to community college, and that course doesn't count towards graduation or degree. They don't have the kind of support that they deserve with respect to guidance for a lot of these young kids, and so the kids fall through the cracks. So I guess I'm not blaming it, but I think keeping score is important. I think keeping score for workforce development programs, what's the success rate? How much money have we spent in this program? How many students have gone through it? How many hours did they go through it? What were the competencies learned in that program? How many are working? And I just think we have to do a much better job of keeping score.
Hi, I was going to ask about the whole remediation issue. You said that you felt that community colleges were spending too much time on remediation. I had assumed that meant that they had determined that there was a need for that, and if that's the case, then how would that need be addressed? But you seem to be suggesting that perhaps the measurement of that need is faulty.
The AccuPlacer is not a good test, but that doesn't mean there may not be remedial needs. But the question is, do you delay enrollment in occupational programs on the basis of remedial need and have this kid drifting around? And the best models I've seen on this are really ones that integrate the remediation activities with the occupational preparation. And so you have remedial instruction, not unlike what you see at the vocational technical schools. I'll give you an example of the way AccuPlacer works. We estimate that about 15 to 20% of the entering first-time, full-time cohort of kids who enroll in the community college system have disabilities. They have some kind of learning disability. So it's a very high fraction. At the four-year institutions, it's very rare. These kids are really concentrated, especially kids that go to college really go to the community college system. And one of the things with the AccuPlacer administration is you know, if you're in high school and you're a special ed kid, you probably have an accommodation of a calculator. So you do your basic math functions. The way you do your algebra is with a calculator. Well, if you take the AccuPlacer, you may not get access to a calculator. So when you're doing long division, it takes you a long time, and because it's a timed test, you may get flunked just because it takes you a while to do that long division. So there's a testing problem here. There may be some remedial issues, but the remedial issues I think are best dealt with as a kid begins to make their progress through the academic portion of the program. A study was done in Virginia where what they found was kids who failed their compass test, the equivalent to the AccuPlacer test, and they traced these kids, how long it took those kids to get to kind of the benchmark courses it took to get out of that place, okay? And so kids who flunked the AccuPlacer took courses, kids who flunked the AccuPlacer and didn't take courses, could they detect the difference between the two groups? And the answer is no.
Hi, I had a question about the your analysis of the kids going into two-year schools. You said that 60% of them are working full-time, and about the influence of that on their opportunities for success. And also, as you compare them to four-year schools that aren't open access, I mean, to me, that's a huge differentiator right off the bat, is open access versus not, so it's hard to compare the two. But when you've got community college students that are working, instead of focusing on their studies, how do we operate around that system?
I would say a couple of things. I would say that we don't know what the work rate is of community college system kids. I think the community college kids work at higher rates, but the I guess that's wrong. I guess we did have 60% of kids in community college working, right? I don't know what the impact of that work is. I haven't been able to integrate that into these models yet, so I don't know what the answer is. Other people that have researched this thing have found that work up to about 20 hours a week doesn't seem to impact academic proficiencies at all. But and some people have found work activities, regardless of intensity, don't matter. I would say the consensus would be this 20-hour kind of threshold. What the intensity is of work activities of community college kids, I don't know. That with respect to kids going to community college system versus the four-year system, part of the way we try to control for that is the kids' academic proficiencies is measured by MCAS scores, and GPA. And once we account for that, we still just don't see, we just don't find these differences. So I think that, and that doesn't account for things fully, but given the kind of the magnitude of the coefficients associated with the institutional effects, there's got to be something there.
Could I ask a question? Do any of you know where the top of the hub restaurant is? Can you put your hands up? And the top of the hub restaurant, and do any of you know where the Escadrille is in Burlington?
I do.
Put your hands up.
Yeah.
When you go in there, just thank that Shawshene Tech executive chef for doing a great job. But these are two individuals who graduated from Shawshene Culinary Arts, had a passion, went to the Culinary Institute of America up in New York, came back here, and now are executive chefs in those two fine institutions. And so part of the thing we've got to start rethinking about, I think particularly in a lot of these high schools where the dropout rate is just so significantly high. I mean, it's 35% across the country, it's 50% in urban areas. We've got to give young people a reason for going. And we've got to tie some interest into why they want to be there in order to retain them. And one of the suggestions, and I think Paul Rebel agrees with, is take some of the things we've learned from these experiences, particularly by giving students some say in what they're doing, and use it in some of these places where the dropout rates and the average daily attendance rates are abysmal. So we can learn from each other. But say hello to those two chefs. They're fantastic.
What? Are we done? We're about done. Maybe one more question?
So I think that Howard Gardner's notion of 7 different types of intelligences and the fact that there's so much focus on STEM right now, which I think ties right into what you all are saying, which is that the high schools would understand that maybe there are different intelligences that could be developed, i.e. in the vocational environment. Maybe the dropout rate, do you think that would affect the dropout rate? Isn't that what you're really doing in the VOTEX environment?
Yeah. I think you're right.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that there's a book written about college, should everybody go to college recently, and the book starts out with a discussion of the multiple intelligences. And the guy tells a story about when he was a kid, and he was a lousy Little League player. He just didn't have hand-eye coordination. He just was lousy. And so his coach said to him, there was a playoff game, it was a big game or something, and the coach said, and the kid's sitting on the bench scared, and the coach said to him, "You're going to pinch hit, okay? Get up there, you can do it." And the guy, his name was Charles Murray, and he said, "In my heart, I knew I couldn't do this. Now it's being set up for failure, And so Charles Murray, of course, dutifully got up there, took his hacks, and struck out, right? And the answer is not everybody's good at everything. And part of the great adventure of life is figuring out what your vocation is. I was taught by Catholics too, the Zavarian brothers, and they only taught us 3 things in high school. They taught us English, Latin, and how to take the superior attitude. That was it. but the great thing about them was, this is a great thing, is they taught you to know your limitations, and what that meant was know what you're good at and know what you're bad at, and stay away from what you're bad at. And I think there's some real merit to understanding, to getting kids, to a point where they really understand what they're good at and trying to capitalize that, in more effective ways. So I think your point's very well taken.
And celebrated as well.
And celebrate it as well. That's right.
Well, I want to thank both Paul Harrington and Charlie Lyons for being here tonight. I think this was just one of the most spectacular. And I want to remind you that next Wednesday, same place, same station, same time. Promoting Economic Development and the Innovative Economy with Chuck Brigsby and Susan Whitman Bannister. Hope to see you here. Good night.